Everyone for coming. So just a quick introduction again into the project. It's called Disputed Territories in Memory. So it looks at, it has different strands. One of them is museums and how museums deal with disputed territories in their collections and in their exhibitions. So hence that's the reason for this workshop, because we wanted to look at what's the role of museums in disputed territories, etc. So because some of our case studies, or one of our case studies is Armenia, we've got two speakers who are talking about Armenia, and I'm particularly pleased about Ali, who is going to talk to us about the carpet museums in Armenia and Azerbaijan and disputed territories. Dan Ruben, who is going to talk to us about contested maps and exhibition contested Armenian maps. And then finally, we're also going to have Harriet, who was a former project manager at the Manchester Museum, in talking about or creating a project on the memories of partition in India and Pakistan. So I think Christina's mentioned that there's a survey in the chat room, which if you want to leave any feedback, that would be great. Also, there's an upcoming conference, the Final Project Conference. So if you want to get involved, please do let us know so we can stay in touch with you. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker now, Ali. So good evening again to Australia.
Good evening.
And Ali is a research fellow at the Australian Research Council. His research focuses predominantly on the cultural heritage and the geopolitics of cultural heritage. And he's written several books on the subject. For instance, The Heritage Movements in Asia, Cultural Heritage, Activism, Politics and Identity, which was published in 2020 with Berkham. He has also published on Forming National Identity in Iran, The Idea of Homeland Derived from Ancient Persian and Islamic Imaginations. He is also the co-founding editor of the Berkham series in Explorations in Heritage Studies. He's going to talk to us today about heritage as the cultural logic of international conflict, the tale of two carpet museums. And I'm going to hand over to you, Alina.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen with you. There you go. Thank you very much, Dr. Passer and colleagues, for giving me this honor to be here with you. I'll try to quickly steam through this with a minimum of time. The premise of my presentation, which is based on a paper I co-authored with my colleague James Barry, is that cultural identity and heritage are central to conflicts between sovereign countries with territorial disputes. In other words, rival states instrumentalize shared heritages, such as the carpet, to legitimate their competing territorial claims. This puts heritage and its representation at the heart of those claims. I shall discuss this point with reference to two carpet museums in Azerbaijan and Armenia, respectively. We all know that heritage and museums perform a multi-scalar function, both nationally and internationally, by way of heritage and cultural diplomacies. And at times, countries strategically promote heritage through arenas such as UNESCO to achieve territorial ends, often, or sometimes, if not often, as cover for ethnic cleansing and changing of landscapes and populations. Now, let's look at very quickly at the background here in the South Caucasus. The heritage and territorial disputes always happen in historical contexts. The South Caucasus follows a complex historical trajectory in the evolution of communal and national identities. From a pre-Islamic period to an Islamic period, for example, the bigger map on the right that you can see here is one of those periods, where populations were defined by religion as Muslim, non-Muslim. And before I move to the next slide, if you look at the two smaller pictures, you can see a kind of gesture towards the ethnic and linguistic complexity of this compact area. And then from there, we have areas, periods of European domination. Chief, of course, amongst them is the Russian domination and colonization, where identities were redefined along linguistic and secularized religious lines. And then after that, of course, after the collapse of the Russian Empire, the period of independence of the republics that emerge, which all of these lines are crucial to maintaining legitimacy and sovereignty of each respective state. And you can see on the map here on the left some of the areas that disputes happen, and on the right the population movements as it occurred. Current heritage conflicts are set in such a complex history, and the history of displacements of peoples and borders, which I suggested here. As you can see, both Armenia and Azerbaijan have been in the past, for example, part of an Iranian empire of that area. And the arrows on the map here show the location of the museums that I'm going to discuss later on in the presentation. But our conflict is much more recent, the one that specifically I'm going to discuss here. It is about the 27th of September 2020's war, in which a decades-long conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan came to a head when Azerbaijan went to war with Armenia and secured a comprehensive military victory with Turkey's logistical support and help, and took back territory that was under Armenian occupation since 1994. Now, so what does this have to do with carpets? Let me preface this by saying in the paper we discussed the background to carpet making and ideas that related to that. And I'm happy to share the link, which is open access anyway for your later reference. But here it suffices to say that this battle has been fought, this battle of over heritage has been fought for decades in a cultural arena where heritage and cultural spaces, in this case, carpet museums, have been active since at least the early 2000s, that is the independence times. By engaging in curatorial propaganda and heritage diplomacy, the museum exhibits nationalist claims over territory. Because of the international recognition of carpets and their value as commodity, both Armenia and Azerbaijan have contested each other's claims over carpet production and use it in their heritage diplomacy when engaging with other countries. Although the campaign is stronger on the Azerbaijani side, well, probably they have more resources dedicated to it, where since the Soviet era, carpets were promoted as a tool of national identity. Since the end of the Soviet period, the Azerbaijan National Academy of Sciences, along with the National Library and Carpet Museum, have continued as key actors in publishing and promoting research on carpets with an emphasis on their national character, the nationalized carpets as such. In 2010, Azerbaijan succeeded in registering the traditional art of Azerbaijani carpet weaving on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. That's an instance of diplomacy working, of course. Research on and production and exhibition of carpets in Azerbaijan has always been a state affair under the direct control of an institution known as Aztalcha, which was established in 1927 with branches in multiple carpet production centers in the country. And by 2016, that entity transformed into a shareholding company, but it's always reporting or under the auspices of the president, which also shows that the political significance of the entity. To get a sense of how strongly Azerbaijan claims ownership over carpets, this statement by President Aliyev, the junior, as he opened the carpet museum in Baku is useful. Of course, the picture is later, but nonetheless. He says, "We believe that Azerbaijan is the birthplace of the art of carpet weaving. Carpets are our national treasure and wealth alongside mugham, that's the traditional music, and architectural monuments." So you can see that there's this whole repertoire of heritage elements that are put together to substantiate nationhood. There is no scientific merit, of course, in the claim that Azerbaijan is the birthplace of carpets. And there is ample evidence showing motifs and techniques of weaving have been common across a vast region of the Iranian plateau, which also includes, and by Iranian plateau, I mean geographical label, which also includes present-day Azerbaijan. In contrast to Azerbaijan's claims, Armenia's focus is on ethnic cleansing and genocide, and they often employ carpets in lobbying for Armenian genocide recognition, either through official exhibitions of genocide carpets. These are carpets that were taken by survivors to their new homelands after becoming refugees in Western states, or gifting them to foreign dignitaries and celebrities tied to the issue of Armenian genocide. Armenia heavily emphasizes carpets as symbols of national identity and continuity in the face of war and exile and genocide, of course. They are thus more focused on Turkey, obviously because Turkey is the perpetrator, not Azerbaijan. As a subset of, and Azerbaijan here is a subset of Turks, not the main perpetrator. So you can see that there's a slight shift of perspective or difference of perspective between these two international actors as the way they approach heritage or heritage of carpets. The Azerbaijani claim over ownership of carpet targets other nations as well, and not just Armenia, including Iran. But it is above all preoccupied with contesting Armenian claims to territory and legitimacy. So whilst Armenians have a bigger target, the Azerbaijanis have Armenians in their sight. For example, Baku's key goal in founding and promoting Azerkhalcha is explicitly stated in this new rendition as preventing the plagiarism, and I'm quoting this, preventing the plagiarism of our carpets by Armenians, thus making plagiarism and theft of intellectual property, as it were, a key theme in the Azerbaijani narrative. This language mirrors Azerbaijan's claims over territory. In other words, it says that carpet, like land, is to be liberated from Armenians. So that's the narrative that comes through. Now, let's turn to the museums very quickly. First, beginning with the Baku Museum, the Carpet Museum in Baku, the two pictures on the right, is one of the most spectacular modern structures on the Caspian foreshore, and indeed perhaps in the whole of Azerbaijan. It's designed by an Italian firm, and it was inaugurated in 2014. Its carpets, some of which were first exhibited as cultural heritage in Azerbaijan in 1954, have played a significant role in developing Azerbaijani national identity since the Soviet era. The museum has since evolved into a projection of Azerbaijani nationhood into the international arena, including, as I mentioned, for the purposes of legitimating Azerbaijan's position vis-à-vis Armenia and Karabakh. Its curatorial narrative around regional carpets reflects the development of state-sponsored national consciousness in Azerbaijan during the 1950s. So this is linked back to the nationalities policies that were inaugurated under Stalin. At the time, the Central Committee of the Azerbaijan Communist Party pursued a policy of strengthening and consolidating cultural nationalism, in large measure in response to similar development in neighboring Soviet republics, which also involved territorial claims, of course, significantly here with Armenia. All these issues have affected the classification of exhibits at the Baku Museum. Now, before I move to the next slide, on the left of this picture, you can see this, the Lenin Center, which would later be the Museum Center in Baku. This is the first house of the exhibits that were the Carpet Museum. This is the modern space of the Carpet Museum. The exhibitions, which are distributed across 3 levels in this building over an entry hall, are organized along a broad thematic lines, clusters, showing the geographical distribution of carpets and their exemplary patterns. In this way, patterns, carpet types, and techniques are linked to land. Beginning on the first level, the museum delineates the origins of weaving in pastoralist tribes. On this level, the curatorial narrative not only establishes the origin of carpet in Azerbaijan, it also links the artifact to the nature and authentic vernacular life of the country, as well as emphasizing the material relationship that Azerbaijanis have with the territory. Throughout the other 2 levels, exhibits are clusters in groups along the space. while the act of weaving is on display through footage and imagery, as well as live demonstrations across levels. The exhibits illustrate various applications of carpets in everyday domestic life and in reflecting some historical events. Therefore, various dimensions of time are put together through the exhibitions in the museum and linked to organics of nature and culture and land. Therefore, this nationalism is claimed as such. Of note is a carpet, and this is an interesting instance, on the second level, depicting heroes of Iranian constitutional revolution, although naming them in this case Sattar Khan, the man, the real picture on the right. The museum effectively follows the official line in the Republic of Azerbaijan, claiming these figures as Azerbaijani nationals. The result is more often than not affirming a nationalist Azerbaijani narrative that makes implicit, well, sometimes explicit, I might say, claims on territories outside the Republic. So it's not only nationalist, it's also expansionist. On the third level of the museum, that level is dedicated to Latif Karimov, a founding figure of Azerbaijani carpet, the person in the left here, and the scholarship and the museum itself, based on his first collections, and of course his students' works. And it illustrates the state of carpet weaving in both the Soviet times and in present-day Azerbaijan. So it's got various things, as you can see in the middle. Carpet propaganda is happening, but also there's the competitions for carpets and the winning carpet examples for each competition. Celebrating Karimov as the undisputed authority in the field, the museum implies and justifies the credibility of the curatorial narrative with reference to his standing. So it's a kind of a circular affirmation. Perhaps the most striking exhibit, insofar as territorial claims are concerned, is a woven piece on the second level of the exhibition that reflects the classification of the museum as well, based on Karimov's taxonomy. This is the picture on the right-hand side. This exhibit also includes a clear claim over Iranian Azerbaijan, which the Azerbaijani government refers to as rather ironically as South Azerbaijan. And it's got other exclusive claims, leaving out Armenia over territories in the Karabakh region. So you can see that here the types of carpets are juxtaposed over a map to show which comes from where, and therefore this is the big Azerbaijan that we're claiming, right? Thus, under the banner of Azerbaijani carpet, various forms, motifs, and artistic commonalities between Azerbaijan and other nations and ethnicities, including Iranians and Armenians, are claimed and appropriated. Now let's have a quick look at the Shusha Museum, or Shushi or Shusha, depending on which language you approach it. The Shushi Museum, which was dissolved due to war in 2020, countered Baku's or Baku Museum's territorial claims. It was founded in 2011 by Vardan Astadze, a philanthropist who also worked as an advisor to the president of the NKR. The museum building was donated by the Moscow-based Armenian entrepreneur and was part of a larger arts organization, which also included 4 state-run museums and 2 private museums that were strategically located across the city to reestablish Shushi as the cultural center of Karabakh. So note that the question of culture is very much at the center of the battle here between the 2 countries and the 2 people. The Shushi Carpet Museum was much smaller than its counterpart in Baku, consisting of 2 main exhibition rooms from the surrounding Karabakh region, mostly following styles closely associated with Armenians, such as dragon carpets and the Knedzoresk, pardon my pronunciation if it's not good enough, and Sunik carpets. The exhibition also included non-Armenian carpets, particularly those from Central Asian countries, such as Turkmenistan and Afghanistan. No mention was made of Azerbaijani or indeed Turkish carpets, although the inclusion of non-Armenian carpets symbolized an acknowledgement that Armenians are not necessarily the inventors of this form of textile. So they're not excluding others in showing the carpets, their own Armenian carpets here. The close relationship between carpet styles woven in Karabakh and motifs also found in Armenia were presented to give the visitor an understanding of both the continuity between Armenian communities across space and the regional variations found in their perceived homelands. The founder of the museum, Asatryan, repeatedly emphasized the link between the museum and the conflict with Azerbaijan. He says, I've been interested in the history of carpets and collecting them since the early age. I constantly heard many stories from my nan and papa and parents about how the Turks often came to Armenian villages, and from the houses they collected old Armenian carpets, exchanging them for new carpets or other goods. Being witness to such incidents, some hid their old carpets and some will just gave in. Thus, the Turks deliberately wanted to destroy Armenian artisanship and pursued a state policy, the ideology of pan-Turkism towards the Armenians, or should I say against the Armenians. Asatryan positioned Azerbaijanis as Turks and as an exploitative group who had taken older, more authentic carpet from Armenians and replaced them with newer, less authentic imitation carpets of Azerbaijan or Turkish artisanship. His statements are ambiguous and situate the museum within the frame of a timeless conflict between Armenians and Turks at large, not just Azerbaijanis. However, in some interviews, he related the same story, but specifically referred to Azerbaijanis to identify the carpet as identifying them as carpet thieves. Asatryan's statement presents his rationale for how Azerbaijanis may have illegitimately taken possession of authentic carpets that they now present as their own. In 2020, at the opening of an exhibition in Yerevan of items evacuated from the Shushi Carpet Museum during the war, Asatryan claimed that 70% of objects displayed in the Baku Museum, which we saw earlier, are Armenian carpets masquerading as Azerbaijani. So you can see that there's a battle of intellectual ownership going on as well. The museum's location on disputed ground, which was the territory, Nagorno-Karabakh, added to its symbolism. Shushi, or Shusha for the other side, was the main strategic objective for the Azerbaijani army in the 2020 war. And it was evidenced not just through the action theater of war, but also it was evidenced through the statements by the president, the military leaders of the Azerbaijani side, and the rest. During that war, it was impossible for all exhibits to be removed from the museum for keeping in Armenia. And the museum fell under Azerbaijani control when the Azerbaijani army captured the city on November 8th, after intense fighting for a few days. On the 25th of November, the museum's founder, Asatryan, informed by the museum employees present for the exchange of the city, said that Azerbaijani soldiers had removed many of the carpets from the museum and taken them to the mosque to use prayers, which is what Muslims do. They put carpets and say prayers on carpets. However, let me show you this slide. I forgot to show you this one. This is all I could get from the old museum. You can see there's a much smaller space, and it's putting these carpets next to one another. And you can see that it's all about this territory here. I don't know if you can see the mouse here, but it's these two pictures. Nevertheless, however, Asatryan later stated that he had managed to remove about 2/3 of carpets in the week before Azerbaijan's attack on the city, and that these carpets were now exhibited in Yerevan. This was followed, of course, by the Azerbaijani side statement, Ministry of Culture, no less, demanding that the carpets, which they argued has been illegally removed, must now be returned to Azerbaijan. So they claim ownership of these carpets that were there. Furthermore, the ministry statement engaged in explicit language of erasure by claiming that Armenians, and I'm quoting this, have never engaged in carpet weaving, so it's unequivocal, but in carpet trading, And in the process of trading, they have been trying to spread misleading information to the world by presenting Azerbaijani carpets as Armenian carpets. So as you can see that it's a complete denial of the presence of any kind of tradition of this sort in Armenia. This has been the most explicit statement outlining the Armenia-Azerbaijan carpet battlefront. So to conclude, I leave you with this observation that I have endeavored to demonstrate the complex and inextricable link between heritage claims and territorial disputes in the South Caucasus and probably elsewhere. It is important to note that after the war, Shusha now was declared the cultural capital of Azerbaijan and the Turkic world at large. And there was a cooperation declaration named and signed after it between Turkey and Azerbaijan. So as these pictures show here, so there's very much a Turkification happening. This specific case is also compounded by its history. Two more things are worthy of noting again. Firstly, the legacy of the Soviet Empire and its nationalities policy, which forced the idea of cultural heritage and territories being conterminous. Therefore, we have containerized forms of heritage ascription to land. And secondly, the strategic use of heritage diplomacy in support of, at times, aggressive and expansionist claims. Azerbaijan has been successful in this regard, and I shall leave you with that. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Ali, for your presentation. Because it's quite late already in Australia, I think I would like to have, even though we're running a bit late, I would like to have the discussion now. So if there are any questions, please do let me know, or please just do speak up.
Doreen, if I may,
yeah.
I would like to do my presentation as soon as possible, because about in an hour's time, I have to be in the airport.
Okay. Ali, are you prepared to wait?
Absolutely, yes. Yes,
okay.
Not a problem.
Okay, great. So then I just move on to the next speaker, who is Ruben Galizian. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Yes. He's an independent London-based scholar and researcher specializing in historical maps. He's written in numerous publications on the cartographic heritage of Armenia, and his latest book is titled The Invention of History, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and the Showcasing of Imagination. His next work is The Clash of Histories in the South Caucasus. He's going to talk to us about the long-term effect of disputed and lost territories on memory, and particularly on maps. And I hand over to you.
Share screen.
Yes.
Excuse the background on my background, which is not so interesting because I'm in a hotel room.
That's
so,
right.
So. Okay.
Yes, all good.
So let me start with the first one. Armenia is named between one of the 10 oldest countries in the world. However, its geographical position is nothing to talk about, because we are located in the south of the Caucasus, and our neighbors, 3 of our neighbors are Muslim countries, and 1 is a Christian country. However, I should say that our conflicts today with our neighbors, some of our neighbors, have no religious context at all. It's cultural only, no religious. To the south of us, it's a religious state of Islamic Republic of Iran, who has the closest and friendliest relationship with Armenia amongst the other neighbors. Protects all the Armenian heritage sites inside their territory, such as chapels, churches, monasteries, cemeteries, etc., and even has presented some of them to the United Nations as World Heritage. However, our Christian neighbor, Georgia, has created dispute between Armenians and Georgian churches. In order to claim ownership to some of the Armenian churches, they have removed the elevated altar of the Armenian churches, thus trying to convert it into Georgian ones, which do not have elevated altars. Now, our Christian heritage in our other two neighboring countries, Azerbaijan and Turkey, have been under attack, consistently been erased from the face of the earth and destroyed, and materials used for other construction sites. Armenia found itself in the meeting point of the two powerful empires of Persia, Roman Empire, followed by Byzantines and the Ottomans, and the Russian Empire. And because of this situation, it has been the battleground for all these large, forceful, large empires, losing a lot of economy, a lot of its people, etc., and culture. Armenia eventually in 1375 lost its last kingdom, and until the 1915 and 18, there was no independent Armenian land. As I mentioned, most of the Greater Armenia and Lesser Armenia, which are the two different parts of the whole historic Armenia, for about 500 years, where its indigenous people lived under the control of the Ottomans. And eventually, after the rise of the Pan-Turkic movement in the middle of the 19th century, this encouraged the Turkic-speaking people, in extremists amongst these policies, having a Turkic-speaking nation, to organize a Turkic-speaking belt of nations from the Balkans to Siberia through northern China. In order to complete this belt without any Christian intervention, in Turkey, Ottoman Empire, in two stages in 1894-6 and 1915-23, organized the genocide of the Christians who lived in those areas, mostly Armenians, some Greeks, and also Assyrians, in order to complete this belt. However, there was one problem, which was the Armenian, at the time, Soviet Armenia, etc., which prevented this from happening. As my area from Armenians who have lived there for 2,500 years. When the Greeks were expelled from there, they went back to, some of them went back to Greece, which is a neighboring country. It was already an independent country. However, Armenians did not have an independent country, therefore they were dispersed all over the world. They lost not just family, their friends and compatriots and lands of the homeland, but most important of it, culture. They have lost their culture. This loss was so great that the first generation of exile didn't even wish to remember their past in order not to relive through it. My grandfather, who was one of the leaders of the defense of the city of Van in 1915 against the Turkish army, never spoke about his past life. He didn't want to speak at all. He seemed to have left his soul behind and almost erased everything, all this calamity from his memory. In whichever host country the Armenians exiled established themselves, in order to replace their lost lifestyle and cultural ethnic identity, they began building Armenian churches, schools, clubs, associations, etc., so that they would go back and live a life similar to what they used to. Thus, the second generation of the exiles were host countries simultaneously raised really had lost. When we discuss disputed territories, different arguments are presented by each side, and there may be possibility of discussing the problem and perhaps come to some sort of agreement, some sort of decision. But in this case, in the case of the Armenian situation, was entirely different. Not only the country was forcibly cleansed of its indigenous peoples, But the perpetrators claim that those people never existed there. Never did those lands, they didn't ever belong to Armenians, and that there had been no ethnic cleansing at all, just that the local Armenian population decided to leave because of the war. My generation was the one that began actively reviving the memories of the lost lands, and which today are disputed, but in fact, the Armenian ownership is completely denied by Turkey. Realizing the possibility of loss of identity, diaspora Armenians began raising awareness on their own identity and find facts about their disputed regions, having in mind the possibility of recovery of at least some of these disputed territories. But as we know, brute force and money rule the world today. Having this project in of the cartographer's book, which was called Historic Maps of Armenia, the Cartographic Heritage, that was 2004. The aim of the book was to make the Armenians, as well as the other enthusiasts of cartography, aware how Armenia was appeared in 2,800 years of Western and Islamic cartography. As soon as this book was published, first the English and then the Armenian editions, I had to call a call from the Armenian History Museum of Armenia, asking for about 25 select images from the book of maps, so that they could present them on permanent display in the museum. This way, the museum was complementing their display of their own historic articles with maps of the region, which came from various non-Armenian sources, I should hasten. The result was the display of museum, where the prints of the following images were displayed inside and above the entrance hall of the History Museum of Armenia. Those that you see all around, the central opposite on the map in front is a map of Greater Armenia during the early Middle Ages. It belongs to the museum, and the rest 25 maps are the sort of maps from various museums all over the world depicting the region of Armenia in there. Now, among the maps displayed are the following, which I will show you now, located, which show locations in the South Caucasus, extending towards the Armenia, will extending towards the southeast of it. Please note that on the last three maps of this collection that I'm going to show you, Armenia as a country did not exist. However, the area was always mentioned as Greater Armenia because Armenian people still lived there. I hasten to add in the Middle Ages and before the 16th century, maps did not have borders. The regions were named with the people that who lived in there. That was the general practice until the 15th, 16th century. Now, here we see the oldest world map ever existed. It's a clay tablet, small, very small, about 12 centimeters by 8 centimeters, found in the kept in the British Museum, and it's 606th century BC. Here, the circle that you see on the left map is the center of the world, Mesopotamia, and there are 3 countries mentioned there, which the German translator Babylon, the other is Assyria, and the third one is Armenia, 600 BC. We come to the father of the cartography, so to speak, Ptolemy, who lived in Alexandria during the 2nd century. This is part of his world map, which shows on the left, the Black Sea, on the right, it's the Hyrcanian, which is the Caspian Sea. And next to the Caspian Sea, on the left, the Caucasian Mountains, you see Albania, which is Caucasian Albania, which is now the region occupied by Azerbaijan, Republic of Azerbaijan. At the time, it's called now Armenia. The Armenians called it Arvan. The Iranians and Arabs called this Aran. The names underlined red On the one on the right, it says Armenia Major, Greater Armenia, to the right of the Euphrates River. And to the left of the Euphrates River, it says Armenia Minor. The map dates for the 2nd century. And on the name underlined green is Media, which later became Iranian province of Iranian Azerbaijan, which is still exists today south of the Arax River. Here's a religious map. Maps were prepared according to the dogma, religious dogma, which told them the earth is circular, it's a flat dish, and divided into 3 continents of Asia on top, Europe below left, and Africa below right. In Asia, on the top, underlined with a bright red line, says Armenia, and the mountains underneath are the Caucasus. This is the map from the 8th century. My view is, my aim is to show that through different centuries, our country has existed in that area. Here is a Muslim map. On the Muslim maps, the south is up top. And this is a 10th century map from Iran, from what a geographer called Istahri. You see the seas on the right are the Mediterranean, on the left is the Indian Ocean, and the Black Sea, which is a circle below, next to Black Sea, underneath, underlined red, is the name of Armenia. That's a Muslim map which claims to have Caucasian Albania as a country, which is Iran. In Iran, there was an Azerbaijan as a province of Iran, and Armenia as a separate country. Armenia being the only Christian country that was included in the because they are the non-believers, but Armenia has a very close connection, economic connections with the Azerbaijan and Iran, Albania, therefore included in our maps. Here is a Christian map of 1250. It's called Salter maps from the British Library. The world is shown as circle. On the Christian maps, east is on the top. And the red area that you see is the Red Sea, and even the passage of the Jews from Egypt to Palestine are shown on that sea. The little part of the center of the map, 10 o'clock direction, that little bit on the right is enlarged from that map, and underlined green, you see Armenia. You see on top of Noah's Ark, sitting on Mount Ararat with descriptions. And that's, this was the 1250 European map. Another word for 1500s, major Europe, Middle East, and Russia. And on the right, underlined red, you can see between the 2 seas, Armenia, the name of Armenia appearing there. All this time, the name province of Iran. The world map that shows Armenia extending from the greater Armenia that extended at the time. Armenians having lived there, it's the region is called Armenia. There are other countries there, which is Iran. There's Turkey. Turkey as a country hasn't been mentioned because in the old ages, in the early Middle Ages, this country didn't exist. It appeared on the maps for the first time in the 14th century, 2000 years after Armenia appeared. It's a British map. Lord Curzon drew it because he was in the area, lived in the area for a long time, delineating the border between Ottoman Turkey and Iran. And at the time, he produced a book called Armenia, a year in Erzurum and the frontiers of Russia, Turkey, and Persia. And this is the map of Armenia from that book. The red line over it, it says Armenia, all that region, extending from eastern Turkey to west of Iran. Now, some of the Armenians who had lost their territories to Turkey in 1915 started thinking of going back to their old their homeland, and those who were the feeling of one of them was that the psychological condition of phantom pain, what they call, if somebody's got a leg amputated but still has some pains in his legs, which they do not exist. This is sort of feeling you have. You know that you have lost the content, these territories. They're not going to be given back to you. But nevertheless, you feel the feeling if you the pain of and sorrow of having lost it. And not only sorrow, but also anger of it. Why did we lose it? After the defeat of the Ottoman Turkey, the Treaty of Sèvres resolved to reward Armenians by returning some of the territories to Armenia. Thus, President Wilson of USA was given the task of delineating the southern and western borders of Turkey with Armenia, which he did in 1920. And this map is President Wilson's own handwriting and the signature underneath that. The red line that you see is the proposed border between Armenia and Turkey. This was done, this was approved, but never implemented. After 1918, after the World War I ended, 3 republics appeared in the south of the Caucasus. But the third country, it was a newly established country populated by mostly Islamic Turks. Then it didn't have a name. It was supposed to take the name of the Southeastern Caucasian Islamic Republic. However, it wasn't done. The leadership, the nationalist leadership, decided to call it Azerbaijan, which was the name of the Iranian province across the border in the Arax River. Of course, Iranian government complained that this is name of a part of our province of our country. Why should this newbie country called by that? But the Western powers were busy at the time dividing the oil of the oil-rich Iraq and Kuwait and those regions, Saudi Arabia. They didn't bother. They were busy dividing it with themselves. So this is the reason that we have the situation today. In 1920, the region was overrun by the Red Army. Once established, the communists used the policy of divide and rule, which was applied widely. Many Soviet republics have enclaves of land in their territories, which belong to the neighboring country. It's not theirs, it's somebody else's inside your territory. In order to clarify the truth, which was in short supply during the Soviet rule, I decided to prepare another special book, as well as exhibition of maps, which as far as possible shows the history of Armenia in various stages, as much as can be possibly shown but by maps. Emphasis was made to the events of the 20th century, such as the genocide, Treaty of Sèvres, independent Armenia, Soviet Armenia, and the present Republic of Armenia and its relations with its neighbors. The exhibition went to display in the Komitas Museum, Yerevan, in 2015. It was on display for a few months, which, in addition to the old medieval maps, which were on the other book of mine, also included the 20th century maps and the development of the territories, handover of the disputed lands from one country to the other. Here, you will see in the next few slides how the Republic of Armenia appeared, how it lost its allocated territories to different countries, including lots of land to Turkey, which included Mount Ararat, our national symbol, the Armenian capital Ani, etc. And other parts were given to Azerbaijan, which was parts of the Armenian territories. Between 1927 and 1940, the communists handed over more than lands to the newly to its east under various pretexts. Many were done without even the knowledge of the local population. It is noteworthy that in Soviet times, one could not dispute the decisions made by the Communist Party, as these could have unforeseen and unwanted consequences for the protesting party. This exhibition also included the following maps, which are clear indications how the Soviets gave Armenian lands to Azerbaijan and Turkey as well, and created disputed territories and resulting in animosity. All of this area, including those with blue and green outlines, were supposed to be part of the independent Armenia in 1918. However, it didn't take long before Mr. Lenin, the maroon, the violet colored territory, decided to give to Ataturk in order so they can be friendly with him. Ataturk could establish good relations with Lenin and perhaps join the communist power camp. Ataturk the territory and turned his back to Russia, to the communism, and politically did the right thing for himself. And the rest was supposed to. This didn't long as well lost as well. Territory on the left, the green one below, this is Nakhichevan, was populated 50% by Armenians. Lenin gave it an autonomous territory name to it and handed it over to Azerbaijan for control. The other part, which is in now mountainous Karabakh, it mentions here, was 90% Armenian populated. Again, Stalin, after a few months after the decision of Lenin, decided to give those also to Azerbaijan, which Mr. Aliyev claims that these are his historic lands. I don't know, a country born in 1919, how could have a historic lands? It's beyond me. Between 1936 and 39, these red pointers, regions inside Armenia, were given to Azerbaijan. These regions, these territories, sit on Armenian highways. In other words, the Soviet Union gave our control of Armenian highways to Azerbaijan, neighbor. The blue one, which we see, is an Armenian enclave inside Azerbaijan, which is in a remote corner of the country, remote from place, with no roads actually on it, nothing. But this was the Soviet policy of did not need any justification. Here, with the dark yellow, is the Armenian territory today, and the blue ones are the territories that were given to Azerbaijan under various pretexts. The pretext being that Azerbaijan wanted to establish in the middle of the two yellow banks, which is Karabakh and Armenia, there's a Kurdish state, province rather, a province called Red Kurdistan, and these, because they were sheep raisers, they needed pastures, which Armenia did have, so the pastures were given to them by Soviet authorities. However, the pastures, the establishment of Red Kurdistan was annulled, but what happened? Those territories, those regions, that there's lands were to be given to the Kurds, stayed in Azerbaijani hands. Anyway, this exhibition of maps has displayed various capitals in large cities all over the world, including Baltic countries, Vienna, Budapest, Slovakia, Warsaw, etc. And I've been present during the openings to give a short talk about the various maps displayed. Manuscript Depository of Armenia, where my map collection, I donated the map collection to them. They have some exhibition permanent, etc., which all Armenians to find their self-identity. A self-identity manifests itself in two ways. One being the cultural and ethnic identity, which governs our daily family and relatives' lives. The other being the political one, which relates to our life in the society at large, wherever we live. The diasporan Armenian political identity is that of the host country, while the cultural ethnic identity could be completely different. since it had its roots in their local family and the Armenian culture of traditional with untraditional values. For any person of logic, the cultural ethnic identity is something worth preserving and has even been preserved in EU countries. Although parts of the big family, European countries have combined economic systems, but they have integrated, but the French are called themselves French, Italians are Italians, Germans are Germans, etc. They never lost their true national identity. All of us participating in these gatherings, in such gatherings, come from the diverse cultural backgrounds, and no one would like to be called by others' name, except in the group of which he or she belongs to, identifies with. This is what may be called ethnic or national identity. Nationalism, since they present different and opposing characteristics. Due to the various problems mentioned in our Armenian self-identity, comes with added baggage. In addition to the creation of more and more disputed territories during the Soviet era, we also have lost most of our homeland as well, over 100 years ago. Territorial gains and losses form part of Armenian historic memory even today. It is sometimes said that the Armenians live in a past and cannot be reconciled with the present situation, but let us not forget that only about 100 years ago, most of them lived in their huge homeland, ancestral homeland, which was 10 times larger than the size of the present-day republic. For the onlookers, this would appear as disputed lands. For the Armenians themselves, these are attributed to the genocide, to unlawful loss, occupation, appropriation, etc. So also are the much smaller territories handed over to Azerbaijan from Armenia by the Soviets in 1920s and 40s. Armenians expect any political discourse on these matters to be based on justice, since for them, these memories are the mainstay of their national identity. This apparent that in order to preserve its homes, you see large maps of Armenia, historic Armenia, as well as images of Mount Ararat, the national symbol of Armenia. If one tries to be a worthy citizen of the world, one should start with being aware of his, her identity, and only then try to be a citizen of the world, not discriminating between ethnic and national groups, while knowing his, her place among them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I know I'm kind of conscious that you need to leave. Are there any urgent questions somebody would ask or wants to ask?
I'm open to questions.
Can I just quickly ask one question? When you exhibit those maps, what is usually the reaction? Do you know how do people respond?
Well, the different people, Armenian response by remembering, yes, we did have a long history when we existed for 2,600 years, and our country kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller over these times. Why? What happened? Why did we do? I would say, I usually reply to them that we did not do that this happens. We should have done something about it. Therefore, non-Armenians mainly say, it was Armenia for a long time. This is new to us. And those who are living in the present, they wonder why would this sort of a handover of little bits and pieces from one country to the other be done by the Soviets?
Okay. Are there any other questions? Ali, are you happy to move to wait until the final presentations so we can have a discussion?
I can wait for another half an hour, not longer. Because my flight is about 2 o'clock.
Okay. So I'm just going to quickly move on. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
So I hope I have got Harriet now in the audience. Yes, I have. Just Harriet, just unmute yourself. Okay, can you just unmute yourself? Press the little button at the top, at the bottom. Can you do it? Can you do it?
Yes, can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Oh, I'm so sorry about before. There's problems at my end, not your end.
That's no problem. We are used to those kind of things. So I'm very pleased that I've got Harriet here, who will briefly talk to us about the memories of partition in the Museum of Manchester. So we know, because one of our case studies is, of course, Pakistan. So I was quite keen to get in perspective on what happens with the memories, of course, of partition. So Harriet was a project coordinator for the project, which ran at the Manchester Museum between August 2017 and January 2018. So Harriet has also worked in a lot of different settings in community engagement, cultural venues, charities, and arts venues. And she is currently the creative producer of a community arts project, writing project.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I will do, Harriet, I will share my screen now so you can see your presentation.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
And then if you want me to move on from the slides, then please do let me know and I just move.
Okay.
All right.
Lovely. Thank you. Okay, shall I
Yes, do please.
go? Okay. So hello everybody. I'm here today to share some of my experiences of delivering the Memories of Partition project for Manchester Museum. The project took place in 2017, which gave us the opportunity to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the partition of India and Pakistan through oral history, an exhibition, a new writing project, and various engagement activities. At the time, the museum was planning to open a new South Asia gallery, which we knew had to be rooted in meaningful relationships with South Asian communities in Manchester. So this project was a great pilot to see how we could develop those partnerships. So next slide, please. So the project was funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund, and these are the kind of aims and objectives that we had in our application. So I'll just read through that quickly. So Memories of Partition seeks to bring together memory, oral history, and physical heritage in a shared exploration of the impact and significance of partition on individuals, families, and communities in Manchester. So we wanted to do that through, firstly, capturing, recording, and interpreting some of the many hidden personal experiences relating to partition. Secondly, we wanted to equip participants with the resources to tell their own story in their own words. Thirdly, we wanted to support participants to feel that their heritage and experiences were valued within the context of the city. We wanted to work with different generations, not just the older generation who experienced the partition, but their children, grandchildren, other generations. And we wanted to be representative of the different faith communities, which for us was Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh. Next slide, please. So the project was based on a number of partnerships. So there was Manchester Museum, who led the project in terms of all the oral history work that we did, and also we hosted the exhibition at the end of the project. Manchester BME Network had fantastic links into local community groups, so they were really important. The Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Race Relations Resource Centre, which is based at our central library, but I think is also part of Manchester University, they specialize in kind of collecting the histories and stories of culturally diverse communities in Manchester. So they really helped us on the collection part, you know, getting the oral histories, giving us training, and then they created a specific collection which was to go into their archive of all the stories that we recorded. Then there was the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester, which developed our new writing project. I'll talk about that in a bit. And then finally, we had a number of community partners. So these included the Indian Senior Citizen Centre, Community on Solid Ground, Burnage Buddies, the Manchester Gurdwara, and the Bangladeshi Women's Association. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, just run out of voice. Hang on 1 second. Right, so in order to begin the project, we wanted to establish trust, build trust with the different communities we wanted to talk to. So the best way to do that, we found, was through a number of reminiscence sessions. So we took relevant objects from the museum. So these included old spices, and we had a number of beautiful illustrations from our botany department of plants from the relevant regions. And we took them to different community groups, and we started off with big discussions first, trying to hone down onto 3 main themes, which were people's childhood, their home, and the journeys they took. So these big conversations would often lead to smaller one-to-one conversations. And the picture we have here is of one of the sessions we held at Manchester Gurdwara. Next slide, please. So the main focus of the project was collecting the oral history interviews. Our main objective was to capture about 15 interviews spread evenly across the 3 main communities. So we had 5 Hindu, 5 Muslim, and 5 Sikh interviews. I did some training with the 1947 Partition Archive, which is based in India, and this greatly helped to inform the creation of a series of questions that we wanted to use in the oral history interviews. So these focused on life pre, life during, and life post-partition. We wanted to identify the potential interviewees by asking community members to become project champions. And the project champions were used to identify these different participants, different interviewees. And to support the champions, we offered them oral history training through the Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Race Relations Centre. So these champions interviewed a number of individuals from their communities and supported them to tell their stories. Next slide, please. So then we had our exhibition in August, and during the interview process, we identified 6 key stories, 2 Muslim, 2 Hindu, 2 Sikh. And we made those interviews into short films, which were filmed by Kim May from Asta Films. And those films were used as the kind of heart of the exhibition. We created this beautiful kind of interactive table that people could come in and press whichever interview they wanted to listen to, and those would be blown up and thrown onto a big screen in the interview space. She carried out most of that filming in safe spaces, such as the community centres or in the participants' homes. In the exhibition, we also included objects that were discovered and identified during the interview process. So these included photos and original documents like inventories that people had made when they were leaving and moving over to different areas. And the picture we have here is from one interviewee whose grandfather was a palm reader pre-partition, and this was one of the I don't know what you would call it, one of the artifacts that he used to read palms. So that formed a really big part of the exhibition. Next slide, please. So now we move on to Come Closer, which was our new writing exhibition, which ran in parallel with the museum project. So our main partner was the Royal Exchange Theatre, based in Manchester, and they identified 8 emerging British Asian writers, and their dramaturgs worked with them over a period of about 4 months. And at the end of the process, they produced 8 individual monologues, examining the partition experience and people's memories of the partition experience. These monologues were performed in a variety of venues, including the Royal Exchange, Manchester Museum, but also community venues like the Indian Senior Citizen Centre, and also a local library that was rooted right in the middle of the kind of Pakistani Bangladeshi community in Manchester. Some of the writers came to our reminiscence sessions to get inspired by the memories that were being told, and some of that was reflected in the monologues that they chose. Next slide, please. So our engagement programme happened once the exhibition was up and running, and it covered many different areas. We did a number of school workshops where we brought school children together with some of the interviewees, and they wrote kind of letters to and from each other, which was really helpful in getting a conversation going. We guided a number of community groups around the exhibition. What have I put further in? Yeah. And then also one of our interviewees, Jason Singh, who is a musician, he, as a result of taking part in the project, he was asked to, we commissioned him to write a piece of music about his grandfather's memories and his experience as a younger generation and how the partition had been passed down to him. And also we were really lucky that kind of world-renowned artist Rina Kalat was having an exhibition at the museum anyway, so we were able to take some of her work and include that in the larger exhibition. Next slide, please. So finally, some of my reflections on the challenges of delivering the project. So the first one is about building trust. So to really engage meaningfully with the different communities, we needed to build trust to allow people to feel safe and supported to tell their stories, which in some instances were really quite traumatic and very personal. One of the issues we had was that the timescale to produce, to get to the final exhibition was very short. We started in May, but we had to get the exhibition up in August to coincide with the anniversary of the partition. So that only gave us about 5 months. So that really impacted negatively, I think, on developing that safe space. Due to the challenging timescale, it became apparent that we had to rely on community gatekeepers quite heavily. So this had pros and cons. Excuse me. So the pro was that by using those community gatekeepers, we were able to access people very quickly. But the con was that the gatekeepers kind of became all powerful in the process, and what they wanted to represent and the stories they wanted to tell kind of took prominence. So it's quite difficult to navigate our way through those different stories with those gatekeepers. Sorry, I'll just get my next piece of paper. Another issue with the language barriers. because the gatekeepers were becoming so powerful, the non-Asian project partners, so myself and the filmmakers, we were finding it really hard to determine the narrative and to keep the process really open, because we couldn't express and communicate properly with Punjabi speakers, Urdu speakers, Bengali speakers. So that was quite challenging. So representation, as I keep alluding to, was really important. We, the museum, decided, I think, without much research having been done really, that the most important thing was that we had to reflect the different faiths that were involved. So we had to produce these oral histories from the three main communities. But as we went through the project, I found that geography was becoming just as important. So we were ending up telling mainly Punjabi stories, and we weren't really covering the Bengali point of view. So we managed to get 2 interviews, I think, at the very end of the process from the Bengali community. But I was really concerned that we hadn't really been as representative as we could be. And then finally, navigating the intercommunal relationships was quite a challenge too. So because, as I was saying, the Punjabi contingent had become so dominant, I was scared that I was scared that we were missing other really relevant, interesting stories. And this picture on the screen is quite interesting. So the child to the right, the tall child in the dark jacket, he was one of the participants in the process. So he and his wife actually approached us. They didn't come through any of the community groups that we'd found. And they had a very interesting story to tell, because the gentleman had been about 17 when partition happened. So his memories were really vivid and almost those of an adult. So really important. But they were feeling quite excluded by some of the community gatekeepers, and one in particular who came from a Pakistani, African, Asian background. So they often said to us, how can she tell the right story, because she doesn't even come from the Indian subcontinent. She comes from Africa, from Kenya. So that was quite difficult to manage that sort of intercommunal challenge there. Finally, the other issue we had was kind of communicating our decision making and the changes that were being made. So one example is that the museum and the director in particular had created a relationship with the Manchester Pakistani consulate, and he was hoping to get funding from them. So he decided that we needed to hold the opening of the exhibition on the 14th of August, which is of course Pakistan's Independence Day, completely neglecting the 15th, which is India's Independence Day. So I was really worried about that. So I suggested that we open it on the 17th, which was the day that the new borders were announced. But because the director had some annual leave, we had to do it at the beginning of August rather than wait for a more neutral date to deliver the project. To deliver the opening. So I think in conclusion, my main reflection is that if I was to do this again, or to do a project that was about disputed territory, I would want to make sure that we were properly funded, so that we had the time to develop that trust and build those relationships. And also that we ourselves had the time to do the right research and to get a better understanding of those different community nuances that we experienced during the process. Yeah, so I think there will always be an issue about bias and representation, and that is the challenge that British museums have in reflecting the histories of their communities, and that I know is one of the museum's ongoing challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harriet. That was really interesting. Do you still want me to show the quick video, or yeah?
Sorry, yeah, that'd be great. So this is one of the Indian interviews. Sorry. One of the Indian interviews that we had as the main part of the exhibition.
Just a second, I'm just in the process of uploading it.
Say hello to the first ever Google Pixel Watch. Track your heart rate with Fitbit and see when you're in your active zone. Get turn-by-turn directions. Make payments faster and take calls. Okay, can I call you back? Right from your wrist. The new Google Pixel Watch.
When the partition was happening, before that, all of a sudden, we realized, being a child, that there is some problems. In the sense, the houses were being burned, people were shouting, there was fighting going on, but it did not bother us. Why? What was the reason for it? And it was happening randomly or without any notice. And we were heading toward Firozpur. And in that truck, there were 3 to 4 families with their minimum belongings. On the way, there were problems. Because the truck was being stopped at various places. And somebody was asking questions. Later on, I realized that they were checking who we were, where were we going, and then there was some element of risk. So very terrified. But we did not know our final destination from Firozpur, what will happen, and what is the significance of being independent or receiving freedom. I did not understand, to be very honest, at that time, how important it is to get freedom. There were hundreds in that area. As a result of that, cholera spread and other diseases. But I did not understand, like a child, what is this disease, what is all that. But we could see people vomiting, children lying on the road, even in the camp. And I did watch 1 or 2 deaths in that area. When this was happening, there were shouts and all going on, fighting going on, half a mile, quarter of a mile outside the camp. Because people who knew that this is a camp, so the opposition people, they were coming to do some damage to the residents of the camp. Those who were fighting for the freedom, they understood, we have to get the freedom, And when they are getting the freedom, fighting for the freedom, naturally, the British government will not live like that. So then when the point came that it could be possible to make India as independent, then the real problem started between the 2 communities, the Indian and Pakistani community. Then we realized there are 2 people fighting to divide their own independence.
So thank you so much for the presentations. Do we have any questions for either Harriet or Ali at the moment?
There are several in the chat.
Okay, I'm gonna start because because I wasn't monitoring the chat. Can I first, before I look at the chat, can I first ask you a question, Harriet, if possible?
Yeah.
I was wondering, because I was just did a lecture yesterday on decolonization of museums. Now, when you think about the history, of course, of Britain, who was the main colonial power, was there a discussion in the museum about the issues of a British museum exhibiting essentially the painful memories and the real complexity between essentially the ex-colonial power, which caused some of the difficulties we see today, and exhibiting those memories?
Yes and no. So I wasn't really involved in those conversations because it was mainly the curator of the exhibition that I'm sure was having those conversations. And I know because we had the new South Asia Gallery opening, it was being discussed, but I was concerned that we weren't there was no action based on the discussions. We were just doing it as we always had done, rather than kind of doing something new. But I think now that the new South Asia Gallery, which is opening, I think in February next year, I know that they have tried really hard to involve the community in developing the exhibition space, and they have a number of I don't know what you call it, a number of kind of points, themes that they've got from their South Asian collective, they're calling it, that where people have been able to voice their interests and their concerns. I know the museum is trying really hard to decolonize itself. So I know, for example, it's given objects back to Aboriginal groups in Australia and Maori groups in New Zealand. But yeah, as a kind of community engagement person, I wasn't really getting an awful lot of the topics that were coming out of that. And I would, and because we had such a short time scale, all we were bothered about was making sure that we got the exhibition open, which again, if we'd had a year leading up to the exhibition to really, get to know people properly, I think we could have done it differently.
And just a final question, if I may. So when you watch the video at the end, it's quite visible. At one point he's got tears in his eyes. So, so the memories are still there. So did you find when you were doing the project, this was passed on to the next generation, or what were the generational?
Yeah, I've probably shown you the wrong video really, because there's three videos of people from subsequent generations. It was really interesting. We found that in some families, there'd been a lot of openness and talk about the partition, but in other families, it just wasn't spoken about at all. It was kind of forgotten deliberately so people could make a new life in the UK. So yeah, if you go onto YouTube and put Manchester Museum Memories Partition in, you'll get all the other ones. But I thought I wish we could have done more about the impact on the subsequent generations, definitely.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go into the chat now. There is a question from Nina Parish to Ali. So she's asking, many contemporary artists experiment with carpets and textiles in their practice. Have there been any instances of these practices being exhibited with the more historical practice you have explored?
I don't think
sorry, Harriet, I'm going to Ali now.
All right. Sorry, what?
That's all right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Not so much at Manchester Museum, but I know at the Whitworth Art Gallery, they've done a lot more about South Asian textiles and the use of textiles to kind of commemorate disputed territory kind of areas. But Rina Kalat, she did the main piece of work that we had in the exhibition was a kind of an interpretation of the Wakas gates in Pakistan, and she used a bit of textiles around that, but it was mainly big gates in the middle of the exhibition area. But yeah, I would definitely go to Whitworth Art Gallery and look, and Manchester Art Gallery, because we were kind of an odd place really to do the project, because most of the museum is about you know, dinosaurs and the Egyptians and kind of natural history. So it was quite a new way of working for us.
Okay, thanks, Harriet. So sorry, it was actually a question for our other speakers, but that's also, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry.
No, but Harriet, that's super interesting. I didn't realize about the other exhibition. Ali, did you get a chance to look at contemporary practices and the way they experiment?
Well, first of all, let me thank Harriet, because that was a fantastic answer that I couldn't come up with anyway. So I think, look, what I've done is, because of the kind of work that I do, I specifically look at the geopolitics of heritage and how it's mobilized. So it's a different context. In that particular context of the places that I went to field work, no, I haven't noticed this happening. Although it may be happening, as Harriet very nicely explained, in other contexts. And I just make the observation that it often seems that outside the hot zones, it's easier for these things to take place than inside, by the looks of it. Like I would imagine, I hope one day Armenians and Azerbaijanis get on. I would imagine that if there is such an exhibition of this sort going to happen, maybe outside these two countries is the first place that it will start, as opposed to one of these two capitals, for example, by the looks of it. That's all I can say. I'm sorry if my answer is not sufficient.
No, thank you very much. Thanks, Ali. I think, Anna, you had a question? So if not, then I'm just going to quickly ask you a question, Ali. You mentioned very briefly the policies of the Soviet Union in dealing with the heritage, of course, of Azerbaijan and Armenia. Can you expand a little bit? What was the policy at that time?
Well, I think Ruben also mentioned some of this. It's what happens. There's a very specific and complex context going on here. If I'm trying to make a very long answer short, so please do excuse me if I omit some parts. Before Azerbaijan is constituted as the Republic of Azerbaijan in between 1918 and 1920, before that, you realize that Baku is the current capital, becomes a very cosmopolitan area. And we have people like the Noble brothers earning their money over there because of oil resources that have been found. So it becomes a very important place in terms of becoming an international hub. Now, what happens here is that all that is good and well, except that gradually what happens is that we have two classes of people developing. Ordinary working class people with lesser educated, and the more technocrats or technical workers, if you will, the proletariat later on, right? They happen to be mostly affiliated with or from the Armenian side. So there is intercommunal tension here and there happening already. But even before that, during the Tsarist period, there is a positive not positive, a negative bias against Muslims by the Tsarists. So this adds to their sense of being left out, right? So in various communal developments that happen and economic developments that happen, clashes flare up. Later on, when the Azerbaijani Republic is formed, which is never fully taken the whole land, it takes parts of the place that it can take during the with the help of the Ottoman Empire. But then afterwards, the Red Army pretty much takes over. It becomes Sovietized, and subsequently there is the idea of let's divide these people according to their national identities. So that's where the other side of the problem comes in through Soviet colonization, a project that Lenin gives to Stalin basically to carry on or to carry out. And according to that, well, a nation is defined, to simplify it, along the lines of having a set of national culture constituents and having a language and, of course, a territory. And so they start dividing the complex map, if you remember that I showed you, of that region with all that linguistic complexity and interconnected stuff. They start, slicing it according to various things. And here, Stalin does this and does it at the other side of the Caspian as well, with Tajikistan and other countries, dividing parts that remained like bones of contention. So many people in that region, and by that region I mean the now independent republics of the Stans in Central Asia and the other side of the Caspian, they believe that Russians throughout have pursued a policy of divide and conquer. That might be a bit oversimplification, but that's also not too far from the truth, to put it that way. And then the result of that nationalization of space, of culture and territory, is that when the force of the occupying, if you will, for want of a better term, empire is taken off, these clashes have the space to actually come out. There have been prior intercommunal strife between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So there's a long history going on here that each episode of violence also builds up. And if I just may add, I apologize for the long, lengthy answer. If I also may add, for example, Azerbaijanis are also claiming to have been the object of genocide by Armenians, right? So that is also happening increasingly currently. I suspect it's a more recent development, this kind of use of this language. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anna, would you like to ask your question now?
Yes, I apologize. I was a bit confused by the interface. It's too long and I couldn't find the unmute button. First of all, thank you so much for this excellent presentations. And I had a question to Mr. I don't want to mispronounce it, but Mozaffari, would it be right?
Yes, you can just call me Ali. That's fine.
Ali, thank you. Thank you so much for this very fascinating presentation. I also work in museums and exhibitions, and I come from region, I come from Georgia, and it was extremely interesting. You kind of provoked me to visit these museums. I don't know how feasible it is in near future for me, but I was really fascinated. And I wanted to ask you whether you observed, because that would be so extremely interesting since you show these links between heritage talk and ownership over the space, and also looked at what kind of narratives these museums communicate. I was very much wondering whether you ever observed and took interest in what kind of discourses and what kind of rather not discourses, but what kind of representations of this heritage of carpets exist in Azeri and Armenian communities, minority communities, for example, in other countries like Georgia, and whether they are similarities and what are the differences, what kind of heritage talk is going on there, because carpets are very crucial element of identity of these groups, as I know. And even in Georgia, like in Soviet era, you have exhibition and representation of carpentry in Georgian Ethnographic Museum, Georgian History Museums. I would be very much interested in going beyond from this national level to more like subnational levels and looking at minority representations, whether you ever took interest in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. You come from a very beautiful country to which I've had the pleasure of going a few times. Look, what I'm looking at, I haven't looked at Georgia in that sense, but to answer your question in a slightly different context, I'm right now working on a book about the two Azerbaijans. That is the Azerbaijan that's in Iran, that the Republic likes to call it the South Azerbaijan, entity, and the Republic of Azerbaijan in the north of the Araxes River. And part of that is looking into how carpets are represented in that Iranian province as a subset. At this point, I'm still in the early days. All I can say without giving too much away, with regard to the Iranian side, is that it seems to me that the same nationalizing process has happened with the Iranian case, but in a much more open way, in the sense that Iran recognizes the diversity of ethnicities, as no other choice, by the way. It recognizes the diversity of multiple languages and ethnicities that constitute what is called Iran, and therefore they use the umbrella title of, the Persian carpet, which is also a brand for selling carpet, by the way. That's where it's coming from initially, and to classify things without denying the ethnicities of the subsets. But the further details I'm working on currently on the Azerbaijan case, the Iranian Azerbaijan, that is.
Just very, very short comment to add to this. Is again very interesting. I just wanted to underline, maybe I didn't make it clear when I was asking my question. I just wanted to hope, or not hope, but assume that this must be mobilized also on a grassroots level, not just museums that are political projects and top-down projects, but on a grassroots level, you also have this mobilization of heritage. And this is what my question actually was about, how these community groups kind of trade these carpets, which are part of their, very strong part of their identity, the more like below bottom-up part.
Yep. Sorry, I misunderstood your question in that sense. What seems to happen is that we are looking at a different ecosystem of having carpets when you look at it from that scale. It is a mix of entrepreneurship, people who want to sell carpets, also those who collect, and some who do both, trade and collect. As you know, the carpet is a very peculiar thing in terms of learning about it and collecting it. So in that sense, they mobilize their own thing. We have smaller museums happening around particular individuals. But in the sense of this turning into a, if you like, quasi-social movement or a quasi-heritage movement as such, for assertion of specific regional identities, I am so far not aware of that. Now, remember, my main case is Iran, and they have a knack for suppressing any kind of social movement of any sort. So maybe that's not a surprise that I haven't heard much in that sense. So it's something to be discovered in the field, I think, or it may come out in the near future by the possibilities that the political system will allow. Sorry, I don't know. Is that useful?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have to unmute myself. I'm just going to give you a quick break, Ali, and I just have a question for Harriet. Nina says, thank you very much for being so open and honest about the experience. If you had to do this project again, and you kind of started to talk already about this, what would you do differently if you did the same project again?
Yeah, so I think the main thing is to make sure that we had long enough in the lead up to the exhibition to make those relationships and partnerships meaningful. And I think one of the issues is that we as a museum did not have enough local community knowledge to really, when we went in there so fast, we didn't know about all the different, for example, the African Asian versus British Asian kind of conflict, which I had no idea about. I didn't know that was a thing. So I just wish that we would have usual thing, that we had long-term sustainable funding and the right human resources to be able to deliver that properly, appropriately. and not have all this rush to try and get it up in time.
Mm. I mean, one of the things which came into my mind when we were talking about gatekeepers. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess one of the challenges also would have been in your case, how much control do you give up, in terms of, yeah. And
Well,
that's the challenge of collaborative projects.
Yeah. Well, and it's a big thing in community engagement that on the one hand you have to validate and reward and, care about what the communities are thinking and wanting to do. But on the other hand, you need to be able to present something in a way that's appropriate to a museum setting. So it's really hard. And again, if we have the time, because I think, understandably, a lot of people were a bit wary about sharing stories and wary about getting involved in the project. But if I'd had several months to get to know them, because what I love about doing community engagement work is being able to go out and have a cup of tea with people and just get to know them, which I didn't really get that chance properly in the project.
Yeah. A question, thank you so much, Harriet. Another question for Ali, which in actual fact is also my question. Is there from Joanna from the University of Warsaw, do you know if there are any practices which actually use carpets as a reconciliation rather than essentially enforcing or reinforcing the hostilities between the two countries? Can you think of any practices, or do you think there is an opportunity to develop any practices?
Thank you. That's a lovely question, and it's a question that applies also to any kind of heritage, because can we use heritage in any way to be inclusive of others without losing a sense of identity, which then becomes a question of heritage and borders. Where do you draw, or boundaries? Where do you draw boundaries? Look, in this specific context that I looked at in this presentation, the answer is a flat no. At this point in time, at least, that's no. But I can imagine, if I may fly a kite here, I can imagine that there could be ways of recognizing the fact that when we speak of artifacts such as carpets and many other things, including pottery, for example, or glazing techniques, we're talking about a series of circulations of materials, techniques, sometimes even the artisans themselves going from one location to the other and producing it. Therefore, a deep down historical research into the biographies of the artifacts, the motifs that make them, and the techniques that make them allow having a more neutral conversation without necessarily saying, oh, there is no Armenia, or Armenia never did carpets, or there's no Azerbaijan, without these kind of bombastic, dismissive comments can actually take a back seat a little bit. And then we can actually look at the artifact and recognize perhaps, yes, there is a particular accent maybe applied in a particular region. So it allows a more, and I use this cautiously, a more cosmopolitan perspective on the object, because often the problem, and the reason I'm cautious about this, often the problem is that some people charge cosmopolitanism with, okay, then we forget about the nation state. We don't have to. It's like, it's not an either or. They can be layers of seeing things. So that's how I can envisage it happening, but not in this context at the moment.
But considering the situation at the moment, Azerbaijan, Armenia, do you think that heritage will probably used again to reinforce some of those conflicts?
Not between these two. Heritage is now being used, increasingly strategically being deployed in what we could label as Turkic nations. And Turkey is driving this through TİKA and other institutions that it's established especially since the AK Party came to power. And it's reaching out through heritage diplomacy, doing this, trying to kind of forge an idea of a world, pardon me, an idea of a civilizational world that therefore doesn't have the normal borders of countries, but has a kind of a more ethnocultural basis. So in a different way, perhaps China is trying to do this through Belt and Road Initiative in a different way, not exactly the same thing, I suspect. Is that, I don't know, am I on the ball here or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other questions? Because I can't see any in the chat for the time being. I've just saw one question for Harriet, actually. When you say you build that trust with your interviewees, how many times did you return to the same participant to build that shrine? Or did you always have the same meeting, or was it differently?
So I suppose the group that we spent most time with was the Indian Senior Citizen Centre. So they have a daily kind of lunch opportunity where people can come and eat and talk. So we went back a number of times to them to have lunch with them and to talk a bit more. But Burnage Buddies, I think we only went to them once or twice. But they're the community gatekeeper from them, she said, oh, don't worry, I've got loads of people I know would like to do this. So we were really reliant on her to kind of develop those relationships and to introduce us to those relationships. And I think that that's where language became a real issue, because I would go to those meetings and of course the gatekeeper and the people we were meeting, they were all speaking Urdu or Punjabi, and I couldn't really get involved in that conversation. I was just thinking before, actually, I mean, so the obvious solution to it is to get somebody from a South Asian background to lead on the project, which I'm all for. I think that probably is the right thing, but it doesn't get rid of the issues around bias and representation, because I was really surprised at how community gatekeepers kind of fought among themselves about who was going to get to tell the story and who was going to have the most prominent story. And in the way we kind of left the Bengali community out of it, and it was more of a Punjabi storytelling experience. So I don't know what the answer is. I know that they've got a Pakistani background woman that's leading the new South Asia community engagement for the gallery. So I don't know what her experiences have been, but I can imagine that there will be sections of the community that go, well, why have they asked her? And I'm not going to tell her, and I'm going to do it differently because Pakistanis don't do it right. We need to do it in an Indian way or a Bengali way. There's just so much intercommunal history and conflict in that area. So in some respects, even though I represented the British and the people that caused the problem in the first instance, in a way I was more neutral and people could kind of be more honest with me about things because I was white British. But I don't know how sustainable that is. I think you've got to have a combination of the two. You've got to have the white British representation, but the South Asian representation as well, working together.
Yeah. Thank you so much. If there aren't any more questions, then I think I'm going to end it at that point. So thank you very much for the speakers. And as I said at the beginning of the workshop, there is a final conference of the project next year. So please do join us again if you would like to. Anna is having another question, I think.
No, I was just uploading.
Oh, so you're just uploading. Okay. So I truly hope that you will be able to join us again. And do please also send us either some feedback, fill in the survey, or send us some feedback. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.